Good evening, Chelsea fans. No end in sight for this Chelsea team after a recent disastrous run of form is extended as Man City sweep us aside and maintain their unbeaten run against the Blues, dating back to that Champions League final in 2021. We analyse another bleak week for the club and discuss whether Tottenham's recent demise can serve as a bit of a harbinger of what could be in store for Blue Coats Chelsea if we stick to the current strategy. We'll also turn our attention then to Manchester United at home at the Bridge next Saturday evening to salvage any hope of Champions League football next season, where we'll be joined by Top Red and cousin of George, Steve Lappin. Let's jump into it. So, George, Chelsea thumped 3-0 by Man City on Sunday at Stamford Bridge, and City really played most of that game in third gear and only really seemed to step it up when they needed to simply swat us aside. A pretty damning indictment of just how far Chelsea have fallen. Incompetence from the senior management, a team bereft of ideas, and a fan base now filled with apathy, happy to be the sacrificial lamb to deny Arsenal's title pursuits. Talk us through this one on Sunday.
It's a very surreal atmosphere at the bridge, as you mentioned. The sun was shining, North London tears dominated the discourse headed into this one. I think gun to your head, you sense that most Chelsea fans were slyly quite happy to let the citizens march on. On the pitch, I think the first half showing was fairly combative from the Blues. I think you even saw Cole Palmer tracking back on multiple occasions to deny Doku. So it was a clear sign, if needed, that the players were up for it, even if the Stamford Bridge faithful were not. I think we shaded that first half. Obviously, that Cucurella finish was denied from marginal offside following some top work once again from João, who's really consistently showing his quality at the top level. I actually thought his namesake, Pedro Neto, had one of his better games of late on top. But the second half was chalk and cheese. I think when the lineup dropped, for me, the relatively diminutive centre-back pairing Fofana Hato felt like a big mismatch up against Erling Haaland. But instead, it was actually Nico O'Reilly who capitalised. I couldn't believe actually in person how big he is. So specimen himself, he leapt like a salmon for 1-0. And from then on, an all too familiar theme resurfaced. I think we can now conclude we're seeing a total lack of resilience under Rosenia, and it's been absent ultimately since the 74th minute of that fateful night in Paris just over a month ago now. So you're seeing Cherky allowed to dance across our 18-yard box, Guehi to pivot, spin and slide home, and even Caicedo, one of our top performers for a sustained period now, uncharacteristically dispossessed by Doku to squirt home for the third. I mentioned guilty contentment, but this turned into ugly hours with a matter of minutes.
I mean, our recent form is absolutely remarkable, isn't it, George? I'm just looking back at the recent fixtures now. I think our last Premier League goal was the 4th of March against Aston Villa. Since then, we've been absolutely rolled aside 1-0 at the Bridge by Newcastle, 3-0 away at Everton, and now 3-0 at home to Man City, with obviously the drubbing by PSG interspersed amongst those. I mean, this is just a pretty unprecedented spell of tragic form, isn't it? And what does it say about, I guess, the trajectory of the club, but also the current manager, Liam Rosenior? Do you pin much of this blame on him? Is this the end of the line for manage Liam Rosenior? We saw news break today, obviously, of Andoni Iraola, fresh off the back of that masterclass at the Emirates, leaving Bournemouth in the summer. Do you think this is the end of the line?
Port Vale aside, we're looking at 13 consecutive goals without response against top opposition since the 74th minute at the Parc des Princes. Total lack of resilience, first and foremost. That Parc des Princes game we rightly lauded. We went toe to toe with, if not one of the best sides in Europe. You saw how they completely pulled Liverpool apart. And crucially, we were able to compete with them for a good period of time. But the moment the chips were down, we've just completely fallen apart. I don't think that's helped by comments from Enzo Fernandez and Cucurella. I think there'll be Enzo stands who are vindicated from our showing against City on Sunday, but ultimately he's been present for all those other showings. I think crucially, it's that lack of resilience and lack of belief now that is coming to the fore. That first half, we were competitive, we did compete, but as soon as we concede, we have that soft underbelly coming to the surface once again.
And in the race for Champions League, the ever expanded number of teams that are able to access Champions League football in that upper echelon of the table confirm now that a minimum of five spaces in that 1 to 5 will be entered for Champions League football automatically, potentially even six if Aston Villa win the Europa League, which looks pretty likely to be honest. But with that in mind, I mean, you're looking at Chelsea currently on 48 points, trailing the likes of Liverpool by 5 points, an even bigger deficit to Aston Villa and Manchester United, and a whole host of teams absolutely creeping up on the backside. The likes of Brentford, Everton, probably Brighton as well, only 2 points behind us after being relegation candidates barely a month ago. It's quite staggering. I mean, do you think that's end of the road for Chelsea's top six pursuits? Not even talking about top five at this stage, especially with those fixtures coming up. Man United, Brighton away in the midweek, Liverpool, Tottenham, Forest. It all looks pretty ominous, doesn't it?
I mean, on the league front, it feels as if we have to win virtually every game now. So in amidst the joy of the North London tears, actually, I thought that Liverpool win against Fulham, I was hoping they were going to be weakened after their battering in the week, but Fulham I thought were pathetic. United did drop points last night against Leeds, and they're upcoming. So it feels like that's must win if we're going to have any chance. And once again, you're sort of preying on the downfall of those other sides and hoping that the likes of Brentford, Everton, who did draw below us, continue to fail to take advantage. I think selfishly, as a match going fan, I'm all my eggs in the FA Cup basket now. I would be very tempted to say it won't happen, obviously. Um, but shy of Champions League football looks a remote possibility. I prefer to tank that and really prioritise that FA Cup run. Trophies ultimately are what it's all about. And as I say, we feel so far off the pace in the league and even among Europe's elite now for Champions League. I would love to really give that FA Cup semi-final against Leeds and a potential final, likely against City, our full attention.
We'll definitely get into a full pre-match preview for all things FA Cup. But you look at Leeds last night. I mean, the counter-attack threat they pose. You know, the Route One football at times and the simplicity of their tactics in just getting the ball wide and crossing it into Calvert-Lewin and Noah Okafor. We've seen Lucas Nemecha previously dominate our centre backs as well. You look at Chelsea completely bereft of ideas, well over a month now without a Premier League goal. I mean, our odds of even getting past, Leeds with that favourable draw at Wembley in the semi-final are dwindling with every passing game, aren't they?
Make no mistake, I think you have to call them as favourites now. So Declan, our mate, sort of joked about Leeds' record. Our Wembley record's been abysmal over the past few seasons. And yeah, they're the form side. They now potentially could be out the woods on the relegation front, able to really prioritise that FA Cup tie. That's going to be a seriously tough match, but it represents the last opportunity, the modicum of hope remaining in the season. I mentioned we went toe to toe with PSG, so one of the best sides in Europe, possibly the most technically adept. But I think Leeds represent a similar physical disparity that we saw against City. So being there in person, I mentioned that diminutive centre back pairing. But City have got the perfect blend of technicians and physicality. So you had the mercurial Cherky that's received all the plaudits. But the likes of O'Reilly, I mean, he's a serious specimen. Obviously, Haaland, Rodri coming back to the fore. It is that blend that appears to be a prerequisite for success on all fronts, domestically at least. And we just seem to be so far off that. There's undoubtedly very little to cheer about Resenya's unprecedented rotten run of form. But make no mistake, we slash the rest of the football community are very much enjoying the respective fates of the North London clubs. You, however, are hesitant to fully bask in the glory of that Spurs demise, particularly. Why is that, Ryan?
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying every passing defeat for Tottenham Hotspur as much as the last, but I just get this sense that their recent plight as a football club has been quite remarkable, and in the sense that it's shattered this feeling of top six invincibility that's lived in the league for so long. We've seen big clubs go down before, Newcastle, Aston Villa, West Ham, Leicester. The Spurs going down feels like a real sort of line in the sand for the rest of the Premier League, who have that assumed status in the Premier League. I mean, Tottenham have flirted with the lower end of the table for a few seasons now, and fundamentally not rectified the underlying issues within the club. And I feel like the average quality now and the financial might of the rest of the Premier League, from mid-table and below, is so high that it makes it so easy to get swallowed up once confidence is shattered, which is clearly the case for Tottenham Hotspur. For Chelsea, we've not descended quite so low before, but we have danced around the lower end of the table in recent years. I mean, wasn't that long ago, the change of the ownership from Roman Abramovich to Bluco, the turmoil in 2022, 2023 season with Thomas Tuchel at the helm, subsequently Graham Potter and obviously Frank Lampard, where Chelsea ended at mid-table, slap bang in the middle, and 12th, but we were only 10 points above relegation, and there were genuine fears in my mind at points in that season that we would get swallowed up into that race. Probably not going down, but similar to how Manchester United and Tottenham ended last season in sort of 17th and 16th. The parallels I see with Chelsea and Spurs currently is on a couple of different points. Firstly, this commitment to a threshold and a supposed wage structure that both clubs have in place. We know that Tottenham have had that for many years. It was a key point of restriction when it came to um, getting contract extensions for the likes of Heung-min Son and Harry Kane. And Chelsea have obviously switched over to from our previous model where we'd throw the kitchen sink at top players in a bid to secure them. We've now got our limit in place, reserved and ring fence for a select few players such as Reece James. Point number two is obviously the refusal to sign A-list premium talent. I mean, Tottenham and Chelsea are both shopping in an entirely different marketplace now to the likes of Liverpool and Manchester City and Arsenal in particular. And the evidence on the pitch is just so obvious in both instances. When you sign B-list talent, you're going to get resultant performances, basically. You see Man City signing Antoine Semenyo and Mark Guehi in January, and you can see the upturn that's had in their form and almost catapulting them back to the top of the Premier League in these final stretch of fixtures. And thirdly, the fact that both clubs have this sheer and utter instability in the ownership. Yeah, the turmoil around ENIC from a Tottenham Hotspur perspective, the departure of Daniel Levy, which all the fans celebrated, passionately at the time, but in retrospect looks like a pretty disastrous moment in the plight of Tottenham Hotspur. And Chelsea with Bluco, the revolt against the ownership, the blind leading the blind. We've covered that in detail on this podcast, but I think crucially for both clubs, it's just it's a tale of doubling down, tripling down on the current sort of status quo. For Chelsea, that's obviously this bizarre under 23 youth trading experiment that we're currently embarked on, which is obviously hampering Chelsea profoundly now on the pitch and wrecking us financially as well with these record losses. I actually saw yesterday that despite this wage structure in place, Chelsea have actually increased the overall amount of money spent on players' salaries because we just have all this dross in our squad in this enormous number of players that we have in our ranks. Some in our bomb squad, some not even in consideration, most of which are just lurking on the bench and failing to offer anything at all in that first team setup. So it is an inexorable descent for Tottenham Hotspur. Chelsea are not quite on that level yet, but it is ultimately a failing project. We're refusing to learn from our mistakes, and I just get this ominous feeling that we are potentially one bad summer again away from really falling and dropping and getting swallowed up by the league.
I think you raised some great points. Ultimately, the abject, unprecedented current run of form we're on is relegation form. So we mentioned 13 unanswered goals against top opposition. I think the fact that the board have been hell-bent on eradicating any trace of the Roman era, so not only the player base, I think Reece represents the last vestige of that Champions League win, but the likes of Neil Bath, Petr Cech swapped out for leeches, as we discussed last week. There's parallels there with Levy, similar vibes to Mourinho, you'd argue, but ultimately he, as she, had track record of competing at the top level, which same can't be said for this current crop. And we are falling off a cliff. So our shocking run of form is in timing with Reece James's absence from the 11. And I do think, just as the likes of Romero, Van der Ven have been touted as mercenaries in recent weeks, calling out the board, doing interviews, sort of trying to cite interest for a summer move, summer departure before the club are out of their dire situation. There's got to be parallels there with the Chelsea squad. How many of this 11, this squad, would you put your trust in to drag us out a similar predicament? The likes of Enzo Cucurella have clearly wantaways. Who can you trust?
I mean, he's obviously a subject of civil war between, I think, true, genuine match-going Chelsea fans and the online Twitter fan base, which is obviously so vocal. But Trevor Chalobah, in the first instance, no matter how bad he's playing, he's always going to put his heart on his sleeve and give his absolute most for Chelsea. I think he's a pretty dependable centre back for us, and you've just seen quite how far we've descended without him, with Wesley Fofana and Hato forming a centre back partnership in recent weeks. So I would back him to, you know, give it his all for Chelsea. João Pedro, I feel like is a player who is of sufficient quality in this Chelsea squad and one of the few players we've signed that has ended up being a pretty successful signing with Premier League pedigree and experience. So I would certainly add him to that list. On the younger end of the scale, Esteval William, I mean, there's definitely shades of inexperience and petulance that we see from him. I remember him kicking out for an early yellow card against Leeds and doing something similar, kicking the ball away on Sunday. So he's clearly a young and naive player, but he's of the required quality and mindset, I feel, to drag Chelsea out of this current predicament. Beyond that, I mean, Moises Caicedo, notwithstanding his error on Sunday, is probably our best player in the squad. So I'm absolutely backing him, and I feel like he's got the right approach and the right mindset for us. He's not down tools to any extent. His quotes during the international break were all positive and reinforcing his commitment to Chelsea. Reece James, no words needed there. I mean, he's our most reliable, most dependable, highest quality, Chelsea through and through footballer in our ranks. But beyond that, I think that's probably it, to be honest.
I think that probably sets us apart from Spurs on that front for the time being, that Cobham connection. So with the likes of Neil Bath, etc., we have had a conveyor belt of top level talent that crucially understand what it means to be blue. So my list is very similar to yours. I would add the hopefully returning soon Levi Colwill to that. But this is exactly where a disjointed ownership, seeing those players as pure profit opportunities, could ultimately erode that connection, that anchor that I would argue will keep us competitive within the league's context for the time being. But they very much risk eroding that, let alone talk about those 355 million in losses and that potential 10-year 2032 deadline with the potential divestiture down the line. So I think for the time being, I'm in agreement that we are secure in terms of league status, if not challenging remotely nearly where we want to be. But that 2032 precipice very much looks to be a potential turning point where we could face a very similar fate. Time now for the opposition view. Up next for the Blues is the red side of Manchester. United at the Bridge, 8 p.m. Saturday night. To preview this one, we've got a very special debut guest, family and top red, Steve Lappin. Welcome.
How you doing, George? Good to be here.
Cheers, mate. Good, thanks. Let's get into it. So disappointing Roses derby defeat last night at Old Trafford, but sitting relatively pretty as far as Champions League qualification is concerned. There is, however, the growing possibility of a domestic treble for the noisy neighbours. So how are we feeling as a United fan, April 2026?
Yeah, great timing this, isn't it? You know, on a nice little run. Carrick seemingly master of all he surveys, and looking forward to speaking to you today on the back of what I was hoping would be a decent result in their Roses derby. And yeah, typical United. Just when you start to believe in them again, they falter. Has been so often the case, I guess, since the Fergie era. Albeit, I guess we have picked up a few trophies since then, unlike some teams. But yeah, I mean it's yeah, disappointing night. But overall, you know, you take a step back on the period Carrick's been in charge again, and you've got to be pretty pleased with progress. You know, two unbelievable early results. Obviously at home to City and then away at Arsenal, I think completely generally changed the fan base's feeling. And I think that's still there despite the disappointment of last night, albeit I think the Chelsea game on Saturday night does suddenly take on, you know, even greater importance as a result as a result of that particular result last night. And you know, I think is it 7 points? You're much better on the league table updates than I am, but I think it's 7 points between the sides right now. Could have been 10 if we'd have won last night. I think 10 points suddenly makes you think as a United fan, you've got a real chance of making Champions League. You know, all of a sudden it's still at 7, and because of the result, you then got a bit of doubt creeping into your mind about, with a couple of injuries, do we start to struggle in the remaining fixtures? So all will become clear, but it's going to be a very interesting end to the season.
Absolutely. I guess our sort of take on United, you mentioned that phenomenal bounce from Carrick at the beginning. It has very much been back to basics post that Amorim experiment. Chelsea sides, bygone era, we've been successful with that back three. But it felt like he was sort of shoehorning the back three on a squad that I actually think was/is in decent shape as we're seeing now. I think you recruited well in the summer, particularly in Burma and Cunha. Has Carrick sort of just reverted to type, kept it simple with a 4-2-3-1, Fernandes back in the 10, or is that a little bit reductive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's at times I think pundits place too much emphasis on formations. I think in some ways there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, you heard Amorim talking for pretty much the full period he was here about, you know, it's not necessarily three at the back, out of possession, in possession, when it's on the right side of the pitch, when it's on the left side of the pitch, you know, the full back's supposed to, or the wing back's supposed to push up, etc. So I think there was probably just something else going on which saw the you know, the relatively average results in that period. And to be fair to Amorim, who I did like, and I am well known for sticking by United managers, as to be honest, the United fan base is, you know, for good or ill over time. But when you sort of look back on the Amorim period, he inherited a relatively average squad from Ten Hag. Despite the FA Cup win the previous year, I think there was not a great deal of confidence or cohesion or a playing style that the players were really bought into and firing on all cylinders. And I think, you know, Amorim over time probably just became a bit, you know, I'm not for changing. I'm not for moving. And the more pundits asked him the question about the formation, the more he was resolutely sticking to it, even when there were injuries, which meant he was genuinely playing some players very much out of position. And I do think the one incredible player United have had for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, however long it's been, has been Bruno. And I'm a great believer, having watched United season ticket holder since the early 90s, probably before a lot of your listeners were born, or certainly they would have been in short trousers. You need to be, finding a way to make your best players as effective as they can be, and particularly if they're an attacking player, as far up the pitch as they can possibly be. So I think dropping Bruno back into that midfield too, alongside Casemiro or Ugarte, as Amorim seemed to do, just for me, it took one of our major weapons out of the forward line. So Carrick coming in, it might be as simple as he knows the place. It was probably a very easy decision post all the Amorim chat to move back to a more standard, more tried and tested formation that suited the players better. But it might just actually be as simple as getting Bruno further up the pitch, affecting games more. And if you look at the goals and assists since that change, it might be as simple as that, as you say, with some decent signings around Bruno. So the likes of Mbeumo, likes of Cunha. I think Šeško's obviously started to come into his own and score. And I think Carrick putting his arm around Šeško's shoulders certainly seems to have had a good effect there. I think sometimes in life, success can be as much timing as anything else, and sometimes it's only 10 years down the track that you're truly able to assess a manager's era, and whether they were a victim of circumstance or whether they were just not that good at their job.
Next season appears to be a pivotal one for United and Ineos particularly. Silverware will no doubt be on the agenda. Is Michael Carrick the man to take you forward into 26, 27?
Yeah, brilliant question. Key question, because I think everything else comes from that in terms of recruitment, in terms of approach to Champions League, in terms of what players you can attract. So it is absolute key question. To be fair to me, this answer has not changed since the weekend when I was asked a similar question, which is it depends how the season finishes. If he sort of continued as he had done up until last night's game, to pretty much, with one exception, sweep all before him, amazing home record, winning some of the key games that matter to United fans. We've still got a couple of big games coming up. Chelsea Saturday night, Liverpool at home is also on the agenda before the end of the season. If we can get results in those games, finish in the top three and maintain that momentum with what has been actually a significant increase in number of goals scored per game, I think the United fans would be well up for giving him a shot, despite the fact that many of them still feel somewhat burnt on the back of taking Ole on full time, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, after what was obviously a pretty successful interim gig. So despite the sort of nervousness around doing that again, as I said earlier, there is no guaranteed route to success. I've been watching football long enough to know that you can find a way to deliver that lots of different ways, whether it's a relatively short term appointment like say a Tuchel or a Slot. And Liverpool's a great example this year where you think they're firing on all cylinders, you think they're going to be difficult to beat. They spend a shed load of money over the summer and they have a dreadful title defence, which obviously has made me and fellow United fans particularly happy. So let's take a step back at the end of the season. I'm sure there will be, with the Ineos group and the forward-thinking nature of those individuals, plenty of options being considered alongside the potential for Carrick to take it full time. But I think there's no need for them to rush. I think it's a case of take a step back, see what the results are looking like between now and the end of the season. But I think if Carrick delivers those big wins, finishes in the top three, feels like he's still playing the sort of attractive football that United fans demand, he must have a great chance.
Did feel like that Leeds loss was kind of the first blip, obviously being a crunch derby game. But I do feel sort of outsider looking in that those Ole comparisons will potentially hurt him. I've not seen too many links, too many suggestions. We've mentioned on this pod repeatedly, I'm convinced Luis Enrique will win Premier League titles at some point for me, he would represent the one almost obvious guaranteed coup for United that could potentially bring you back to the summit. Maybe a Thomas Tuchel, but beyond that, I think I'd agree. I'd keep it ticking, unless one of those top managers is available.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And you look at maybe some of the others that might come available, like a Glasner as an example, just doesn't feel like a significant step forward in the quality, class, history, ability to operate at the top level. I mean, let's face it, United is an absolute goldfish bowl when it comes to column inches and podcasts and people never short of an opinion, as I've learned to my cost as I came into the office this morning. But yeah, so I tend to agree with you. I mean, Luis Enrique, I've not, again, you're a much more student of the game than I am. He's a name that people mention. Maybe Tuchel, albeit I think he's extended his contract with England now, hasn't he? He was due to finish after the World Cup. That looks to have been extended. If he has a decent World Cup, you can imagine him continuing. So in the absence of something really special, Carrick, as I said earlier, if he has that finish to the season that we all hope he does, then he could easily be the best choice. At least give him one more year and see how he goes. And it's, as I said earlier, there's no guaranteed route to success. We've tried the big name, tried and tested Mourinho. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and I loved him being our manager actually. And he won, silverware as he tends to everywhere, but didn't quite make the big stride in the Prem. We've tried the relatively unknown, up and coming youngster in Amorim with different ideas. That's not really worked out either. Somewhere in the middle of that is Ten Hag and people like Louis van Gaal, who who came in with a big rep, and you thought, right, he's going to be the man to take it. And yeah, he won an FA Cup, but not quite making the progress in the league. So there isn't a guaranteed formula. You guys know that. You changed managers a few times over the course of recent history, and sometimes it's just a moment in time, a group of young players coming through, the right mix of more senior players, a couple of good windows, and you can suddenly get on a run. But as Liverpool have found this season, you can suddenly hit the skids as well.
There's infinite parallels, as you say, between United and Chelsea, particularly on the managerial front, the chopping and change in recent years. We've actually said Rosenior does sort of resemble Amorim to an extent, oversharing in interviews. You mentioned Bruno Fernandes being deployed in the wrong position. That was our biggest gripe with Maresca. You'd often see Cole Palmer on the left. He's not quite recaptured that Pochettino form. Where I think the parallels end, particularly been recruitment. I would say this past season. So I praised particularly the Mbeumo Cunha signings, Prem proven quality.
Yeah.
And you'd be tempted to add Lamens into the mix as a perceivably solid keeper to date. What's your sort of take on the circus that is Chelsea FC in 2026?
Yeah. Well, it has been a circus, hasn't it? I mean, since you and I started talking football, probably 15 years ago, something stupid, when Chelsea were having an amazing time, had lots of stability, and I guess versus my childhood, where 1980s, they were not always even a top division club. It felt like they'd really arrived on that scale. And it's funny actually. I think for United fans of my era, growing up in the 80s, you tend to think about the big games being Liverpool and City, albeit City weren't always in the same division at that stage either. Arsenal and Chelsea guys weren't really on the radar until that, the era of Abramovich and Mourinho. And in a way, for United fans, I think we were always pleased that Chelsea were there because it meant that somebody else, if United were having an off season, could make sure City or Liverpool or Arsenal didn't win the league. So as we've discussed previously, I think there's a bit of an unspoken bond between United fans and Chelsea fans for that reason. But more recently, it seemed to have lost that stability. As you said, I think some of the signings have been questionable. I mean, there's obviously been the Garnacho move between the two clubs, and I think that probably exemplifies what you were talking about in terms of recruitment. So, seeming to be struggling at Old Trafford, not necessarily with the character required to succeed at the top level at a top club. So to take him, I thought he wouldn't play particularly, actually, but he seems to have been playing quite a lot of games. So I don't know what you think in terms of what you've seen of him, but that seemed like an odd situation. And for me, we've replaced him with, as you said, Premier League quality and Burmo and Cunha, who have had a material impact on this season. That feels to me like overall a good move.
The jury is very much out on Garnacho. It did feel like decent market value. There were question marks over his antics. Ultimately, he's not yet looking like he's cutting it. That left wing berth for us is still one that we've not really been able to nail down a starter there for a while. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. If he could pop up with a goal on Saturday, that would definitely go some way to improving his reputation at the club. You mentioned that fan base affinity, United with Chelsea in bygone eras. Very much feels like that with Chelsea and City at the minute. I'm presuming, despite the football world indulging in this Arsenal potential bottle, I'm guessing you are hoping that they just about crawl over the line.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one actually. And United fans, I think, from different eras, see the world in slightly different ways. So me and my dad, as an example, my dad growing up in the '60s, City's his absolute, most hate club, and you can understand why because they were competing for league titles, very much against each other, the sort of the holy trinity of United and the Lee Bell Summerby of City. But fast forward to my childhood in the '80s, as I said earlier, they weren't even in the same division. So you almost looked out for their results in the second division and hoped they could get back up into the top division. So there would actually be a Manchester derby. So I definitely don't have as much sort of vitriolic feeling towards City as my dad does, but I do have vitriolic feeling towards Liverpool. So I've actually been quite happy to support City over the course of the last few seasons while they've been going head to head with Liverpool. So it's an interesting one. I probably, in a strange way, know a lot more annoying Arsenal fans than I know annoying City fans. And
Amen.
so I think I'll probably just sit back with the popcorn and sort of see how that evolves over the course of the coming period. And probably either way, there'll be a shred of comfort in it for me.
Blood either way, win-win. So
Yeah,
Saturday, 8 p.m. You mentioned it's a crunch fixture. Feels like the jury's very much out on Resenha on top. Feels like a must-win for us. 7 points between us. Need to claw that down to 4 and hope that Liverpool and Villa drop points elsewhere. Let's have a prediction and a final score.
yeah. Well, I mean, you've said it. I think you guys need to win. I think we're probably okay with a draw, keep that sort of 7 point cushion. Not that United have ever, in my entire life of watching them, been good at playing for draws. So I'm sure that's not what they will go out for. But also on the back of a couple of injuries, an additional suspension on potentially on last night as well. At the back, I feel like we're likely to concede. So I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to go 1-1 or 2-2. If you push me on it, I'll say 2-2. A Saturday night goal fest.
I'm inclined to agree. Goals guaranteed. We've been shocking at the back. There's defensive centre back pairing issues, injuries, etc. Sanchez has been shaky of late, but I'm also backing us to score against you guys. There were definitely frailties that came to the surface yesterday. So I'm going to predict a 3-2 Chelsea win, must win. I'm going to call on Palmer to channel the energy from that hat-trick a few years back, and let's have a Garnacho goal, the cherry on top. Enjoy the game, mate. And
Yeah, no, I will do. I will do. And I had to try. I had to try and shoehorn this in, but having been in Moscow in 2008, if there's a penalty, let's just hope someone slips over and sticks it wide.
love it.